There is immense suffering in Gaza, and in order to cure that suffering, we have to diagnose the actual problem. But unfortunately, what's happened with the media is they've created a landscape where it's really nearly impossible to know the truth. They'll pick something that's a kernel of truth, but they'll do it in a way that's very manipulative. That's not to say there's not starving going on in Gaza, but it's to say, why do you have to choose the one photo of the child who actually has another condition that's not starving? And this isn't the first time that that's been done. And this is a pattern, present something shocking, just the byproduct of a situation. They don't present any of the context around it. Let the audience's biases, which for a lot of people is distrust and skepticism of Jews, fill the rest of the picture. When the actual truth or the full story comes out, make a small correction that a tiny fraction of the people will read. And by that point, people have already absorbed the narrative. But I think the people at the top of these propaganda campaigns, they don't want to save human life. They want to dismantle Israel, and I think they want to dismantle the West.
All right, welcome to an emergency podcast episode of Wiser Talk. With me today is a really special person. His YouTube channel is called So That We Don't Forget. He came on the show today because there's a lot going on right now in Gaza and around the world, and there's a lot of discourse about it particularly. And Ehud and I have been friends for a long time, and we've been spending a lot of time together. So we wanted to kind of just get all our thoughts out to help us understand, and I'm sure the rest of the world and people around the world are thinking just as we are. So we actually did a bunch of research, Ehud more so than me. So Ehud, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So let's just kind of start out with how we're feeling right now, because personally, I've been feeling confused in a lot of ways with what I'm seeing on Instagram with a lot of these horrifying images coming out of Gaza. And I'm having trouble defending it, because I think it's my natural instinct to want to defend it, but it's getting harder and harder to defend. And over the last couple of days, been really looking into it, and that's what we're going to get into today. So how are you feeling right now?
Well, it's natural to feel that way because we're often bound. We feel bound by Israel, the land. But the irony, the frame that anti-Israel will often paint and try to place us into is detach our connection from our spiritual and historical and cultural connection from the land of Israel, but bind us to the every decision of the modern secular, so to speak, government of Israel. And so it's important to keep in mind that it's not your job to agree with everything the Israeli government does. Obviously, we know, most of the country wants an end to the war for varying reasons. Half the country protests Netanyahu out on the street. So that doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that they do. But of course, the instinct is understandable because there's always such a short leash of tolerance, it feels, for Israel, for the Jewish state. And so you often spend a lot of time and mental energy convincing people just to see it in a humanized light. And so then there's this feeling of a need to explain anytime that it does something wrong, even though you shouldn't have that obligation.
Yeah. Yeah, man, it's crazy what's going on right now with this. They're being accused of famine, or causing a famine. Israel is being accused of causing a famine. And I'm seeing a lot of big podcasts that I like talk about it. I'm seeing friends who have never weighed in on this topic now post on their Instagram story, Free Palestine for the first time, or show a picture of emaciated children. And it's really heartbreaking for me. It's really hard to see. And I want to talk about looking into some of the inner workings of why we're seeing these images, and whether it's just straight up what's happening. Is there a famine in Gaza and this is just what's happening and it's a result of the actual war crimes that Israel's conducting, or is there something deeper on the media side? And what I found was that it's true. This seems to be a very calculated media play, and they're using misdirected and misleading images to perpetuate a narrative that isn't true. So what do you know about that?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think the tactic of the anti-Israel side throughout has been to take something with a kernel of truth, like so-and-so people are suffering, and then exaggerate it to a level that is not realistic or distorted, so that when you try to correct that distortion or that exaggeration, it looks like you're nitpicking about suffering or you're denying the suffering, and it gets you into this intellectual trap. Yeah, no, I mean, the media is definitely selective. If you say that, let's say, since the start of the war, around 100 or so people have died of starvation or malnutrition in Gaza. I mean, that's horrible, and we should do something about it. But, we have to wonder why, like, literally no one cares that 250,000 people in Yemen have died of, starvation and resource shortage related deaths, 80,000 of which have been children under the age of 5. Right. And that's not to say we should distract or deflect from what's going on in Gaza, but it's to say that if these people say they care so much, that, really the core of their concern is the sheer number of people dying in Gaza and the way that they're dying, then, as we say in Judaism, kal v'chomer, even more so with these other situations, you would think they would care tenfold. But obviously that's just a cover, and it betrays their ulterior motives. And unfortunately, yes, there is immense suffering in Gaza, and in order to cure that suffering, we have to diagnose the actual problem. We have to figure out what's causing the suffering. But unfortunately, what's happened with the media is they've created a landscape where it's really nearly impossible to know the truth and to trust them and to trust what's coming out. And this is kind of the similar sentiment that you'll hear coming from a lot of people right now is, I don't know what's true. Even people who are on the ground right now, like we were watching that interview with that guy, I think Nick Freitas on trigonometry. He's like, I was on the ground in Gaza. I've seen a lot of things. I can tell you about it, but I also don't know the full truth about everything. There's a lot of politicization over the distribution of food between the UN, the GHF, IDF, US. And so it's not as simple as one side. It's not so simple as, is either Israel not delivering the aid or is Gaza stealing the aid? I mean, those things can be discussed, but there's a lot of inner politics going on as well. And of course, throughout this conflict, everyone has just wanted one scapegoat, most people wanting it to be Israel.
Do we know if there's an actual famine going on in Gaza? Have you looked into it to see if that's actually true? Because I've been hearing that there's some areas where there's plenty of food. There's some areas where there's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, again, it's hard to know, and I'm not an expert on this stuff. And it's really hard to know because for the last almost 2 years since the start of this war, we've seen in the news over and over again, Gaza is on the brink of famine. Gaza is on the brink of famine. We've even heard that people are on the brink of famine or food insecure even before the October 7th war started. So there is a bit of, I don't want to call it cry wolf because I imagine there are dire situations, but I imagine there are levels and gradations to it. And it is very possible now that people, are very close to starving. But I don't think that's the intellectual concern here. I think anyone who's a humanitarian who cares about ethics and human life, whatever side you're on, can get on board and said, let's feed these children, let's feed these people. I think what we take issue with is how it's being presented by the media. And for, obviously the bombshell now is the picture that went viral that the New York Times shared of that mother holding her baby who looks like he's basically on the verge of starving to death because you could see his spine and his bones. It's come out that actually that baby, that condition was not from starving. It was from a muscular deformity. I believe it was some sort of cerebral palsy combined with some other things, which are of course exacerbated by living in a war zone. But what people showed was if you expand the image, if you take away the crop and you see his child brother right next to him, he looks fully fed. Now, again, that's not to say there's not starving going on in Gaza, but it's to say if there's such a high volume of starvation going on, why do you have to choose the one photo of the child who actually has another condition that's not starving. And this isn't the first time that that's been done. That's been done as well with another child whose photo was circulated. I forget his name. It was Osama something. We could put it on the screen.
Yeah.
And he was airlifted to Italy and treated there. But again, not for starvation, for another muscular condition that he was born with. And this is a pattern for the New York Times and a lot of media outlets like The Guardian. Their tactic is present something shocking, present just the byproduct of a situation. Don't explain it at all. Let the audience's preceded biases fill the rest of the picture, which for a lot of people is distrust and skepticism of Jews. When the actual truth comes out later, the full story comes out, make a small correction that a tiny fraction of the people will read. And by that point, people have already absorbed the narrative. And I can give about 5 or 6 other examples of when this has happened throughout the war, but we could get into that.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that New York Times photo on the cover was just crazy of that emaciated child, and anyone with any heart, unless you're a sociopath, would immediately want to blame somebody, and that's Israel. And it's almost like Hamas has been like taken out of the equation of any of the conversation or any of the blame. And of course, they're weaker than Hamas. Hamas is weaker than Israel militarily. But it seems like Hamas, time and time again, have really found like their secret weapon in this war, and that is using the global stage and the global sympathies for their cause. So I feel like that is the main takeaway that I'm seeing over the last couple months and years, is that Hamas has traded in or realized that they can't win with their weapons, but they could win with sympathy propaganda. And it's almost like every single average American who's posting on their Instagram is helping them. And why wouldn't they? It's, I've a lot of my friends are posting on Instagram that those pictures of the starving kids in Gaza. And it's really sad because they don't know the whole picture. They don't know the whole context. I mean, someone can answer right away, I don't need context on a starving child. Like, they need to be fed. Like, bottom line, like, there's nothing to talk about. This is horrible. I agree with that, right? You agree with that? Everyone agrees with that. But the problem is that Israel's being blamed and taking all the blame, and Hamas is not accountable for any of it. And there's a lot more to that story. Do you know more details about the distribution of aid and what role Hamas has in obstructing it or helping?
Yeah, well, first of all, I disagree with those people. I think context matters. I think who you blame matters, because if you can figure out who to blame, then you can sort of intercept that and figure out the solution and figure out where things are going wrong. Like I said, it's a very complex situation. I'm not there. What I'm more concerned about is the simplicity with which the media reports it, and this is a pattern for them, again, which I can go over. But it seems like the players in this situation are the different distributors of the aid, right? That seems to be, on the one hand, UN, who has a history through UNRWA of sort of collaborating with Hamas, knowing on some level that some amount of aid is going to get hijacked, held up, and stolen by Hamas, probably even having to cut deals with them. And I think you mentioned offline that, a lot of drivers have quit because they're like, listen, we're just getting hijacked.
Right, let's talk about that.
But I do want to say it's not just Hamas. They're also, in this kind of free-for-all Wild West, gangs have also formed in Gaza, different factions. But then I also want to say, and I'll let you get back to what you were going to say, is that on the other side of it, Israel has brought in the GHF, which I believe is an American-based, Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and they're doing it their own way. And the UN, basically, we can see there's a lot of video footage of this, that there's all these tons and tons of aid basically rotting on the border on the Karen Shalom crossing, because from what I understand, the UN has said that it doesn't approve of the way that the GHF is distributing aid. As we've seen, a lot of people have died trying to get aid, and so they don't feel that it aligns with them on an ethical level. So I think that the UN is just as much to, be questioned about the stall in disseminating the aid.
That's something that people don't. This is something that people don't think about is how who's driving those trucks into Gaza full of that aid. I think that's such a good point to humanize this and to see this on a practical level. Is like, imagine that's your job, that you actually have to drive a convoy of trucks full of food to a war zone that's known for hijacking, gangs, malicious activity. Who in the heck of the right mind would take that job? It's such a great thing to think about, and really, helps add some nuance to this thing. And apparently the truck drivers are on strike. Some of them just refuse to go to work, and I don't blame them. I mean, like, probably have to have like you probably have to have like military people driving in. That goes back to like, okay, so the IDF should probably be somehow involved in distributing this aid, but no one really trusts the IDF, and if the IDF does anything, they get blamed for it. Which lends to the whole thing is like, why is the IDF even responsible for providing aid to the enemy which it's fighting?
Right.
It's a crazy concept.
Ironically, I see a little bit of a parallel with, the left wanting to defund the police in America, because what they'll also always say is the police are not equipped to deal with people with mental health issues or domestic abuse issues. We should have social workers come in. And it's the same thing I actually think in Gaza with Israel. The reason you're seeing so much chaos likely is these are 18-year-old kids with machine guns, right? They are not psychologically trained to distribute food. And then the point that you brought up is the giant onus that's been put on Israel to distribute food to the population whose government committed the worst attack on them since the Holocaust, right? No army has ever been expected in history to feed their enemy. And when I say enemy, I don't mean all the people in Gaza, but what I mean is that their rulers are the enemy. And it's just actually absurd when you take a step back and think about it, that like, why isn't anyone asking their government, the people they elected, why they're not feeding them, why they don't have bomb shelters for them, why instead of building bomb shelters, they've built tunnels under the ground, under hospitals, mosques, schools, more expansive than this, the New York subway system or the London Underground.
Yeah. Starting to sound like an Israeli propagandist, though.
I mean, listen, if anything I'm saying is wrong, look it up and point it out. But this is all verified stuff. So sometimes what we call propaganda is, I don't know, it's truth without nuance. I think I'm providing truth and things that are verifiable, and I also sprinkle in nuance. So
yeah, it's crazy, man. It's not good, and the public reaction has been driving me crazy, because it really feels like a new All Eyes on Rafah campaign, and it almost feels like so calculated. Like, it almost feels like if you look at the timeline of how, when the war in Iran was happening for 2 weeks, nobody thought about Gaza at all. Everyone was just yelling at Israel for attacking Iran, and Gaza started to like kind of fade out in the public mind. Even for weeks after, I feel like people weren't really talking about Gaza. And I feel like, I don't know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it feels like some sort of calculated propaganda publicity campaign to get Gaza back into the main narrative by making this famine crisis, maybe exaggerating it to some degree, showing misleading photos on the New York Times, doing its propaganda marketing campaign again to demonize Israel. Do you see that too?
Again, I think it's both. I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. I think when people want to market or promote something, they have different coordinated campaigns that they plan at opportune times. So I think the things going on on the ground are real, right? People were concerned about Israel going into Rafah, and so then they planned a campaign around that. People are noticing that the starvation is becoming more real, or it's gone from on the brink of starvation to, okay, now actually people are starting to die or come close to dying. Let's plan it around that. So again, like I've said, they'll pick something that's a kernel of truth, but they'll do it in a way that's very manipulative. And we can kind of go from the beginning, and of course this has happened long before October 7th, but we can go from the beginning of this chapter and look at this pattern of behavior, right? I mean, the first thing we can remember in the war is when Israel was blamed for bombing that hospital that apparently killed 500 people. Upon further investigation from the international community, they found out that it wasn't 500 people. The crater was much too small to be, a bomb from Israel. And turns out what it was most likely a failed rocket from the group Islamic Jihad. 10% of rockets launched from the Gaza Strip fall short in the Gaza Strip and kill people there. So when we talk about the death toll, we're not even accounting for that. Apparently the anti-Israel people don't care about 10% of the rockets that fall there. Next thing we can look at is when Israel was blamed for incinerating the Jabalia refugee camp. They were blamed for literally intentionally firebombing and incinerating them. And what actually happened was that Israel was in a firefight with Hamas, and they hit a place where Hamas was storing their weapons, a weapons depot that, of course, Hamas, like what you said was propaganda, it's just reality. Hamas was storing their weapons next to this refugee camp. And so it created a secondary burst, which ended up burning the people, which, again, is horrible. But it was the fact that Hamas was storing their weapons next to a refugee camp. Again, another story that people just digested. The media later added details to and walked back, but people had already forgotten. We can look at what we were told was the flour massacre, when people were trying to get flour, and apparently the IDF just gleefully shot them down with a machine gun. What it turns out is there were some warning shots, there were some warning fires, but the vast majority of people in that situation, the actual cause of the deaths was a stampede that occurred.
In fear, like the gunshots caused people to stampede.
I don't know the cause and effect, but that was the cause of death. We can look at the All Eyes on Rafah campaign. I mean, that was huge. We remember that. That was one of those things, like what's going on now with the starvation, is all these people coming out of the woodwork on our social media who were like, I wonder what they think about Israel and Gaza. And it's like, hey, they never post about it. Maybe they don't care. They're neutral. And then it's like that next wave of people come in and they're like, okay, now I need to ride this social train.
Yeah, it's almost like everyone's going to come at some point.
At some point, right?
It's almost like a pressure.
And the All Eyes on Rafah, this was not conspiracy. Like this was, it was a conspiracy, but it's not just a theory. Like this was a very coordinated campaign. There was artwork created behind it. Everyone reshared that thing. And they said if Israel went into Rafah, that confirmed it was a genocide. And what ended up happening, Israel's side of the narrative actually got proven, which people don't want to acknowledge, which is that many of the hostages were being held in Rafah in civilians' homes, in journalists' homes. But this pattern repeats itself over and over. And so the media has basically slow dripped these libels, this negative perception of Israel, when it's really much more complex and nuanced, and honestly not out of the common for modern urban warfare.
I want to talk about this guy right now, Anthony Aguilar, who's going all over social media. He's going on the BBC, he's going on every news station he can as an eyewitness testimony of what he saw in Gaza as a contractor. I learned some things last night because, of course, like everybody else, I've been seeing this guy all over my feed and wanted to look into him. Pretty much want to explain to the audience that he was the one who took that photo, or claimed to have taken that photo, of that young 12-year-old boy who traveled 12 kilometers on foot to get flour. And as soon as he got flour, he kissed the hand of Anthony Aguilar, this American contractor, and then was reportedly shot and killed. And obviously this draws on the heartstrings of everybody and all the sympathies. And if you see, I'm going to probably let's throw the clip in of Anthony Aguilar right now.
The soldier is Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar, a Special Forces veteran of the U.S. Army's Green Berets. He's in Washington. I spoke to him from a spot just near the Gaza border.
I witnessed the Israeli Defense Forces shooting at the crowds of Palestinians. I witnessed the Israeli Defense Forces firing a main gun tank round from the Merkava tank into a crowd of people, destroying a car of civilians that were simply driving away from the site. I witnessed mortar rounds being fired at the crowds of people to keep them controlled.
So let's go into the truth of Anthony Aguilera. I did some research, and this is all publicly published stuff. You could see this. The GHF published like a whole press briefing about Anthony Aguilera. So apparently he was contracted through a third party to help distribute aid in Gaza. There's so much more to it, but essentially the through line is that most of his claims are false. He was most of the time spent in a hotel in Israel, wasn't even in Gaza for most of his time, and he was only a contractor for less than a month. And in that time, he has been very disruptive to his coworkers. He was actually terminated, fired, because he was not a good employee or contractor, and they ended his contract. There was then a bunch of texts back and forth between him and his contractor to help get him back on the job because he wanted to come back, and it got really dirty. He said, I could be your worst nightmare. So he's making threats, like what the heck those threats were. They didn't know at the time, but now we see what those threats were, is that he was going to come out as a whistleblower. So now we have this guy, Anthony Aguilera, as a whistleblower, as a man inside Gaza who sees the atrocities that's going on. But is it true? A lot of the claims are false. And apparently the GHF is saying that he wasn't even there to be able to witness these things, and these stories are all fabricated. So it just continues this like ridiculous, calculated negative narrative about Israel and their atrocities. And it's just so crazy to me because this guy is really believable. I mean, this is a real ace in the hole, and it really is their worst nightmare. I mean, not for GHF. I don't know if I'm sure politically they want to be in good graces, but for Israel, it's just terrible. But what a phony this guy is. I mean, it's honestly, you really don't know what to believe.
Do you think he's like a sociopath? Do you think he was planted?
I'm not sure if he was planted, but I think he's a smart guy. So maybe a little bit of a sociopath. He probably was pretty altruistic in heart and wanted to help the people of Gaza. And when he was terminated for whatever he was doing, I don't think they got so explicitly into what he was doing. He tried to get his job back. And after he realized he wasn't going to get his job back, I think he wanted to go on a revenge disgruntlement, classic disgruntled employee campaign. So at first, like you see him blurred out in a lot of these things. I think he was intentionally trying to hide his identity to be able to make this mysterious whistleblower like a bigger thing than it was. And then I think he realized that he needs his identity to be known in order to really milk this. So I think he's now building a little career off this. I'm sure he's going to write a book. Right now it's July 30th, 2025. I'm going to guess that he's going to have a book out in the next 3 months and try and milk this public figure and make some money off of it, and maybe altruistically try and do some good. Because I'm not saying that Israel's innocent in any way, but this guy is clearly fabricating the truth. There's no international journalist allowed into Gaza. So this man being a whistleblower is really all we have to, base any truth. And the world is eating it up. Every single news station is covering it. We see it all over the place, is that we have this American whistleblower revealing the atrocities of Gaza.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, it shows this is a good example of why there should be international journalists in Gaza. And I understand the reasons why not probably have to do with people, giving intel on the plans or whereabouts of the IDF. And as we saw through UNRWA and people who accompanied Hamas during the October 7th massacres, many of them were journalists. One person even won photo of the year, for taking the picture of the girl in the pickup truck with her broken legs, naked. But there should be international journalists there. But at the same time, just because there aren't international journalists doesn't mean things aren't being constantly recorded there. I mean, there were films that either were nominated or shortlisted for Oscars that were all about Gaza. I even remember there was one film that was actually recordings from 20 different Gazans' perspectives. So this kind of comes back to that claim of genocide and people constantly comparing this to the Nazi Holocaust, which is, such a terrible moral inversion, but let's take their claim.
Sure, let's have some fun. So
the Nazi Holocaust, because the Nazis covered up their crimes so much. There weren't cell phones back then. It was so intricate, and what was later discovered was there were mass executions, there were gas chambers. When I visited Auschwitz for the first time this past year, what really struck me about it was, I mean this in the least facetious way possible, it really was like a theme park for death. Everywhere you went, you saw like how many different creative ways this death cult had of murdering people. And so in the age of cell phones, where there's so many journalists within Gazan journalists, and just average people with cell phones, you'd expect to see that sort of thing that they accuse Israel of, that people like Norman Finkelstein say was a concentration camp pre-October 7th, that is an extermination camp now, that is the new Auschwitz. So, when it comes to this guy, again, it comes back to this thing of we don't know. And this land is obviously so plagued by biblical narratives, right? Like it really, I'm not someone who believes in religion or in kind of a supernatural or theocratic way, but I do believe in kind of spirit haunting things, right? And this land really continues to be the center of the world, the center of conflicting narratives and ideas. And, if this was a movie, I think the theme would really be that you don't go to this place to find the truth. You go to this place to create your own truth.
Yeah, we were even toying with like a spoof video of like the marketer of Hamas and how brilliant they've played this. I mean, it's just, as someone who does marketing, I mean, you can't really have done better than what they've done on the global stage. And Israel could not have done much worse, honestly. I mean, I'll hold my tongue because maybe they could do worse. But Hamas is just killing it on the marketing game. They're just killing it and everyone's eating it up. And as much as I don't want to tell somebody to not post a picture of a starving child on their Instagram, at the same time, it's blatant propaganda for Hamas. Do you agree?
Well, there's genuine suffering going on. There's no denying that. But what we need to do is highlight the line between that and psychological warfare. Because, this is really a war of intentions. Each side is trying to paint a picture of the other side. The pro-Palestine side or the Hamas-influenced side is trying to say that Israel is genocidal and wants to exterminate the Palestinians. The pro-Israel side is saying that Hamas is using its population as human shields and is sacrificing them like pawns for psychological warfare. And the thing that we can do is ask ourselves honestly, what is more likely, that a country that already has 2 million Arabs or ethnic Palestinians as citizens, that has the biggest microscope and scrutiny on it in the entire world, who's held to a double, triple, endless standard, just has this deep plan to exterminate the Gazans in plain sight, or that a group who launched a vicious attack on a military that they know is far superior than them, that they can't beat with weapons, who glorifies martyrdom, who uses their own family members for suicide bombings, is now using their population as a psychological warfare tool to win over the sympathy of the world and turn against Israel, exactly how they're doing now. And when you look at it that way, it's obvious which is the more realistic option. So this is not to say like the suffering is not real in Gaza, but who is enabling it?
Yeah, and it's so, I feel like it's not, you really don't see pro-Palestinian people condemning Hamas. You really don't. And there are some, I think the smarter activists that actually want to make change in Gaza will condemn Hamas and realize that a regime change is what's necessary for safety of the Palestinians and food and aid and prosperity of the Palestinians. And you just don't see it at all.
Well, it's not just about condemning Hamas. I think a lot of people are willing to do that. It's about admitting that they are facilitating what is going on right now.
That's the bigger. Let's just get one thing at a time, though. First step is condemning Hamas and realizing that they don't have the Palestinian citizens in their best interest. And number two is realizing that they're actually responsible for every Palestinian death on their own hands. All the starvation in Gaza is their fault. They are using their own citizens as, I hate this word, human shields. We have to find another word. I mean, it's just so cowardly. And then number three would be a mass movement to overthrow the Hamas government, which we've been seeing in Gaza. There have been protests. I don't know the details around that.
And protesters get murdered and tortured and mutilated and then dropped off at their families' doorsteps for protesting. I'd encourage everyone watching, if you haven't already, to follow someone named Hamza Hawidi on Instagram. He's someone who escaped Gaza. I believe his family is still there. And he's very critical of Israel, but he understands what Hamas is because he was imprisoned and tortured by Hamas for protesting against his government. And now he's a writer, a journalist, you could say an influencer, a peacemaker on this. And there are probably many more people like him who are unable to speak out because, right, we did see those protests against Hamas at one point. Of course, the international media and the college campus people didn't put any emphasis or championing behind them. And they're really risking their lives.
Mm-hmm. So the average American posting on Instagram these days, I want to know your take. Do you think that they're at fault for posting a Free Palestine post or posting a picture of an emaciated child saying, like, this has got to end, Free Palestine, hashtag? Because I have several friends who are doing this. Do you think that those people are to blame?
Blame for what?
Meaning, like, do you think that they are
in the wrong?
In the wrong.
I think on the one hand, if you think the way to stop Israel is to get Western nations to turn against it, then you're doing a good job because it's working, right? But on the other hand, I think you are literally doing free labor for Hamas. Like, you are literally doing their propaganda war for them. You're helping reward them with a Palestinian state for doing October 7th. Because, again, Hamas, this is like literally their game plan. This is not some conspiracy theory. This is something Yahya Sinwar has talked about. This is what Hamas officials have said. They said, we'll do this again and again. They said, we love death more than you love life. They're geniuses. And this is actually the bigotry of low expectations of the left, thinking that they're so dumb and they just kind of came in with their paragliders and their makeshift weapons. I mean, these guys have very calibrated propaganda campaign. I mean, they have DJI RS3s. Like,
it's a good drone.
They have all the newest gear from B&H.
Gimbal, yeah.
They probably got it from B&H. But no, but they what I mean when I say they're geniuses and they're sophisticated, they understand all aspects of the Western mind. They have people devoted just to this. They have people who understand exactly how the leftist white guilt social justice mind works and how to play into that. They have people who understand how deep-seated anti-Semitic prejudice works, and when you throw out bait for people, how easily they'll jump on it and match it with their deep-seated skepticism of Jews. So, to the people on Instagram, I think they're unknowingly playing right into all of this. And so they might ask, okay, well, what could we do instead? Should we not protest Israel? I mean, imagine if the pressure that was on Israel right now was on Hamas to release the hostages and surrender. Like Israel has the weight of the world on its shoulders right now. The Jewish people have the weight of the world on our shoulders. Imagine that was on Hamas right now. And I say that because people keep saying, how do we end the war? How do we end the war? That is how you end the war. Let's say we accept that Israel is in the wrong and they're the aggressor and they're the bad guys. That's still how you end the war, right? First of all, I don't know of any genocide in history where the genociders have said, yeah, we'll end this extermination if you just give us these two things, like return our hostages and surrender. Right.
Yeah, people don't believe that.
Yeah.
Though that will end the wars. Just
Except basically every Israeli official, except for maybe some extremists, have said that over and over again. Bibi Netanyahu said it. Naftali Bennett has said it. So that's what I advocate for. It's not that I don't criticize Israel. There's a lot to criticize. But I like to get to the source of what's keeping the suffering going. And the source of what's keeping the suffering going, what Israel says it cannot stop the war without, is the main thing getting the hostages back and not having Hamas as a threat on the other side of the fence. And so what I would say to the people posting on Instagram is, if you really want to save people, that's what you would do. But I think the people at the top of these propaganda campaigns, that's not what they want. They don't want to save human life. They want to dismantle Israel, and I think they want to dismantle the West.
yeah, and the West doesn't see through that and don't know what to do. So all that they're left with is to post a picture of a starving child and say "Free Palestine." So for those reasons, I actually don't blame them, and I'm probably doing it as a coping mechanism because I see these people around in my life that I know post about Gaza and Palestine and demonize my country. And it's hard for me to blame them for posting it because they're human beings with human emotions and they have reactions just like anybody else. And it's hard for me to blame them for doing it because they don't have the wherewithal to find out that nuance. I just can't. So I just...
But you're assuming that they're doing it for humanitarian reasons. And yes, there is like a humanitarian trigger when you see terrible images, right? But they're doing it for social proof. They're doing it because of this guilt of, I don't want to end up on the wrong side of history. And I do think it is wrong to project your inner emotions, your insecurities onto a foreign conflict halfway across the world that you don't know the ripple effects of what your posting is going to do. I do think that's wrong.
Do you have any other takes about this whole thing? I know you've been thinking about it.
Well, what I really want people to take away from this, again, is not to not criticize Israel, but to unravel and question your bias and why you may have such a negative perception of Israel. Think about how the media has rolled all of this out. Think about how this has been dealt with. Usually in war, the war starts happening and the public and the officials build their case about what the nature of this war is. Is this a just war? Are there war crimes? Is there genocide? Is there ethnic cleansing? That builds over time. Israel was accused of genocide from day one. From the day they got attacked, right? They were accused of genocide. And what that's done is, even for some of Israel's staunchest supporters, like in the Republican Party or whomever, it's put the onus to prove they're not bad on them. It's put the burden of proof on them. And it's reversed the process. And so everything is filtered through that lens of Israel good, Israel bad. And the more we see Israel bad, it adds these tallies that confirms it's a genocide, right? Whereas if you were to just describe another war throughout history, right, like the Vietnam War, the Korea War, the war in the Balkans in the 90s, and you listed the characteristics of those wars, you said there were war crimes that happened, there were mass propaganda campaigns, there was torture, there were rogue soldiers, there was tons of abuse and corruption. There was starvation. What would people say if you said after the fact that's what happened in those wars? They'd say that's fucking horrible. That's why we should never have wars, right? But with Israel, there's a trickle effect, and they trickle all those things out over time, and so each one is another kind of notch in the short leash of tolerance that society has for the Jews and the Jewish state. And so over time, it inches closer and closer to, I guess those guys were kind of right about the Jews. They'll present things with kernels of truth, but they don't present any of the context around it. And even me saying that right now sounds wrong because it sounds like I'm trying to justify people dying. No, what I'm trying to do is call the world out and ask them, should we contextualize death in any circumstance? And if we can't contextualize death or suffering in any circumstance, then we should call out all suffering in the world equally. We should try to end all suffering in the world equally. But it seems like for every other conflict that goes on in the world, people say, well, the world's a fucked up place. It's a messy place. That's war. But for Israel, it becomes this big philosophical existential question of, why do we have people suffering in our world? Because they're suffering at the hands of the Jews, allegedly.
That was a brilliant take.
The other thing I want to say is, like, I really want people to think about the psychological effect of attributing something to you from the start, saying it's genocide. I'm going to give a really extreme, kind of grotesque example. Imagine I called you a pedophile, and I told your mom you're a pedophile. I told your friends you're a pedophile. I told everyone in society you're a pedophile. At first, you'd be like, what are you talking about? And people would be like, I know Will, he's not a pedophile. But imagine...
Can we please stop talking about this? I just don't want to... I'm just joking. Go on.
Okay, and imagine... So at first, everyone would doubt it, be like, that's a ridiculous accusation. That's a libel. Like, don't say that. That's really screwed up to exaggerate, like, make something up like that. But imagine I texted them about it every day for a year. And they're still like, well, I know he's not a pedophile. But then they see you interacting with some kids in town, like giving out candies in town. Or your mom sees you with, like, your nephews or something. She is now, whether she likes it or not, because we are pattern-seeking humors, filtering everything through that lens. And she may feel guilty about it. She may feel wrong about it, but she's going to see you in a different light.
Pattern-seeking humans.
Yeah, and that's
true.
That's what's been done to the Jews. I mean, it's marketing, and you know, the Palestine left is more similar to Trump than they'd like to admit, right? Because that's Trump's whole campaign. It's repetition over and over again, beating something into your head until it's completely normalized, and it's not shocking anymore, and then society just accepts it, and so that's what they've done, and it actually is, again, a form of psychological propaganda, because it reaches the point where even Israel supporters, they feel that it would be such a relief to just say, it's a genocide. Israel's the bad guys. Because it's too much weight if you're not Jewish, because it's not your existence to carry that. And I think that's something that we as Jews, you know, that's what really weighs on us, is we have people, not just people in the media like Megyn Kelly or, I don't know, Barack Obama or whomever, you know, thought was like giving us the benefit of the doubt. We have people that are 1 degree of separation from us, close to us in our lives, our loved ones who aren't Jewish. And if they didn't have us, they would have a completely different perception of Israel, of Jewish existence from the news. And we are kind of like that one source for them. And so then there's a tremendous amount of pressure and burden on us, and we think about them with every story that comes out. Not that they have to defend everything Israel does, neither do we, but yeah, I think that kind of speaks to the game, the polarization that the other side, so to speak, is trying to put into place, and they're trying to drive a wedge between people.
Yeah, I think about that all the time, how, like, unless you have a Jewish boyfriend, Jewish girlfriend, friend, whatever, cousin, whatever, like, there's no way in hell that you'd be able to defend Israel or see any other side of the coin, because you've been conditioned for the last 2 years with all these horrific images and see Israel as a colonizing entity. There's no way around it. So it's really crazy. I mean, takeaway is that, like, you know, it's not our jobs to, you know, be ambassadors, I don't know, to Israel. I mean, some people feel it's like their calling, but it's really tough. I mean, I personally feel like I have to, you know, I have a voice, I'm able to articulate things. I have a lot of non-Jewish friends, and I don't go around telling everybody, but they, you know, for a lot of people, I'm their only Jewish friend. They know I'm Israeli. And I hope that I'm doing some good, but for others, it's a lot of pressure on them to have to do that. And, unfortunately, a lot of Jews are giving in to this pattern and, turning in their Jew card and saying,
because they're accepting the frame that their identity has to be tethered to the Israeli government and not the Jewish story, the story of Israel, that land. But I don't feel that I'm an ambassador to Israel. I feel I'm an ambassador to moral consistency and not being a hypocrite. And so I don't get moved emotionally when people say, well, this is so emotionally overbearing, it must be a genocide now. For me, I'm like, well, have the terms changed? Has there been new information to prove that this is a genocide? I think it gets to the point where emotions are so overwhelming, and it's understandable we should feel emotions. We shouldn't be sociopaths, but that nuance just becomes too heavy to carry. I've always sought truth. If Israel was committing a genocide and that comes out later, a real one, like according to the definition, like what the Nazis did, what was done in Rwanda, I would want to know, and I would want to speak out against it. But I go based off of available evidence. I don't treat things like a conspiracy theory. And right now I see a huge moral inconsistency with how the world treats Israel versus how they treat other wars. I mean, this gets brought up all the time, but just to reiterate, brought up Yemen, where 250,000 people have died from some form of malnutrition or lack of resources. 80,000 of those kids under 5 years old. 500,000 in Sudan just from malnutrition. Millions of people in Sudan are facing food shortages. But the other thing is, and let's get back to the point about food and providing food and aid, which Israel should do, and Israel should try to help out just from a moral and ethical standpoint. But again, Israel is held to a higher standard than any other army ever to provide food for their enemy's population. And yet no enemy in history or no army in history has ever been expected to do that. I mean, if we look at when NATO put siege on the Serbs in the Bosnian War, no one was yelling at NATO, provide food to the Serbians, right? The idea was the Serbs were committing an ethnic cleansing against the Bosniaks, and NATO was going to try to stop them at any cost. Even in wars that you could argue are unjust right now, like Saudi Arabia against Yemen trying to oust the Houthis, there's a complete blockade on Yemen, and that's why what's happening is happening there. But no one cares.
Yeah, no one cares that, Sudan. People are actually starting to wake up a little bit to Sudan. I've been seeing Sudan. I've been seeing some Instagram posts that there's like these donation stuff to go feed Sudanese people. So at least that's good. I mean, if you're gonna be a altruistic, activist, then it only makes sense that you cover everybody. And it just seems just so double standard that Israel needs to be called out for every freaking thing. So we'll see where this goes. I feel like I wanted to cover a couple things tonight. I think we did. I think it's important for people to hear and learn these things. Obviously, this is still a developing war.
And I want to be clear just about one thing. When I bring up these other countries, I think when most people do, it's not to deflect from the situation in Gaza. It's to call out that there is a deeper motive behind this, because whenever you have some sort of moral inconsistency or fixation on one place and one people, there's a deeper and darker intention there. And what that also does, if all you cared about was the Palestinians, is it doesn't serve the Palestinians, right? Because if your solution to the conflict is to remove all the Jews from Israel or create a situation that's unsafe for the Jews, which the Jews will never let happen, then you're not creating a realistic and pragmatic future for the Palestinians.
Well said. Amazing. So we're actually going to be interviewing a Persian guy who's not Jewish, who's been speaking up about his childhood and the current regime in Iran. We're going to do that in a future episode. Ehud's going to join us for that, so it's going to be awesome. Want to tell everybody where they could find you? I know that you've been running this YouTube channel lately called...
So that we don't forget, it's fresh off the ground. So maybe I'll post a clip or two from this. We'll see. But yeah, and I'm going to be posting more stuff there just about the current moment. There will come a time, I think, where we'll look back on this moment and think it's crazy, the explosion of anti-Semitism, and I want to record it, before people try to paint it a different way.
Yeah. Ehud is a super insightful guy. He's going to put out a lot more video content, so you should go follow him. The video links to his channel are in the show notes, and you could follow along for the ride, as well as he'll join us for future podcast episodes. Thank you guys so much for joining. This is Will the Wiser. You could follow us on all platforms for more episodes, content, and follow my Instagram to see all my little explainer videos. Thank you so much for watching, and hope you have a great rest of your day.